You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to episode 214 of Arsenal Pass. This week, Hayden is in Taipei getting ready to cast the world premiere for High Seas. So definitely tune into that if you don't have that on your calendar. But because of that, he's a little bit unavailable, and we've got a very special guest with us today. It's none other than Nathan Crawford from the Card Guys, Runeblade aficionado, content creator, and a caster in his own rights. And we are so extremely pumped to have him on the show today. Thank you for coming on, Nathan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I'm just glad to be here, and I've watched Arsenal Pass for a long time. I'd probably say the better part of 3 years. So it's great to make it on, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on, Trey. Really interested. We have a whole bunch of news that dropped recently. There have been big changes in Flesh and Blood the past week, pretty much, and I'm super interested to hear your takes on it. You stream every week. For those who don't know, Nathan streams on the Card Guys channel every Wednesday evening. Wednesday US time. And I haven't yet caught up to your stream. I normally catch it, like a couple of days later. I watch back the VOD. I haven't caught up to it yet, which means I'm going to hear all your takes fresh, and I can't wait. But before we get into that, how's your week in Flesh and Blood?
It was good. A little bit slow. We are definitely lacking a couple cards from the set, so I was really looking to kind of dive in. I'm eager to. I'm excited. I love the set. Just kind of lacking the information to really dive in. Um,
Did you play any events the past weekend or anything?
did not, unfortunately.
Sounds good.
Nothing local.
Okay. Yeah, honestly, same boat over here. I have a skeleton of a Marlin Brew, where I'm just like, these are the cards I'm pretty sure I want. But it's only like 30 something in the main board. I'm just waiting for the rest of the commons and hopefully more harpoons to come in. That's pretty much the only deck I'm brewing. I'm just leaving other people to brew the Gravy Bones and the Puffin. Which one are you brewing? Or your main one if you have one?
I'm actually leaning toward Puffin.
Okay. That's interesting. I've never
Uh,
known you as a mech player.
Well, I mean, just the cogs and being able to tap them for like little boosts and stuff like that. So it seems neat, interesting. I don't know if it's really good or strong from a viability standpoint. It seems good enough to be viable, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think Puffin might be a bit of a sleeper. I haven't been seeing much hype around her. A lot of the hype has been obviously Gravy Bones, and then Marlin's a second. But I think Puffin might be a sleeper mostly because of Polycranker. That card seems quite nuts because, well, the first time you activate it, you're just going to get your card draw. Like, if your first gold cogs and get your card draw. And then they have to deal with it. Otherwise, you're just drawing cards.
Right.
So then you sort of take like half a turn from them or full turn, depending who they are. So I think people might be underestimating Puffin a little bit. But it sounds like you're not in that camp. We're going to move on.
For sure.
Moving on to the news, we had a ban and restricted announcement that dropped a few days ago, and alongside the bans in CC and Living Legend and some other formats as well, it also came with a whole bunch of news, and we're going to get into all that in the main topic, so I won't cover that here. Aside from that, we've got the High Seas World Premiere coming up this weekend in Taipei. Tune in to the stream because our boy Hayden is casting it. And we had... Well, ProQuest season Singapore is over, and so now we have access to the overall ProQuest season results. And I'm just going to list out some of the top performers over the entire season, which was Florian at the top, actually edging out Aurora when it came to overall wins, partly because Aurora LL'd about, 3 or 4 weeks into the season. For an end of the season, 123 wins, and Aurora ended just behind him at 118. And then the third most winning list was New, which is like a half of Aurora and Florian's wins at 60 wins. And then after, it's Azalea and Prism at around 30-ish wins. So Runeblade stays winning. Also, looking at this graph, I kind of forgot that Enigma and Zen were part of this ProQuest season. They were knocked out. I mean, they LL'd in the first week, and so they're there at the bottom of the pie chart. Anything from this pie chart surprise you, Nathan? Or anything you think sticks out to you?
I mean, like you said, the Runeblades. I mean, that was kind of the story of the PQ season. Now that you mention it, I kind of forgot as well as far as Zen and Enigma kind of being there because it was such a relief, especially when Enigma left, kind of like giving a little bit of opportunity. But of course, we got Florian as a result, really jumping out. But I was kind of I was expecting a little bit more from maybe like Prism and Azalea. I mean, they're not too far off from the top per se, but the number threshold was a little bit lower than I was expecting. And I was kind of expecting a little bit more from Mario as well. I think Mario's been doing really well with the dagger variant, so I was expecting a little bit more results from that variant specifically. But overall, I would say pretty what was expected.
Yeah, your favorite class at the top of the pie chart.
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like all the assassin players kind of gravitated towards new, and that's something that kind of even up. I was saying it throughout ProQuest season. I was constantly surprised at how well new was doing week after week because I don't think she was very happy to see Aurora. I don't think she was great into Florian either. So every time I see her like at the second or topmost winningest hero every week after week, I was just like, why is she here? Like, how is she doing this?
Well, I mean, the main reason is if you look at the card at the bottom left corner, there's these three letters called MST, and that is just that's what does it. That's the key behind it.
Yeah, makes sense. We have more news. There was a rules reprise. I think I didn't see too much hype around this. Not a lot of discussion around this. But there was a rules reprise for High Seas Limited that dropped, and I think if anyone is going to be playing the world premiere or even playing at the nationals where we'll be playing High Seas Limited for the first time, definitely go check that out. It's got a lot of clarifications on how tap and untap work, as well as the timing window when you're supposed to when you're supposed to untap, and Treasure Island specifics as well, which is going to be a shared macro across both players. It's different from the Rosetta macro. All these sort of things that will just help you at the world premiere and actually even your pre-releases. So definitely go check that out if you haven't already. Also, they gave us a new acronym for what you're supposed to do at the end of your turn, which is you put your card in your arsenal, you put your cards in your pitch zone at the bottom of your deck, you untap, and then you draw. So it's APUD.
Draw, yep.
And when I first saw that, I was like, oh, it's very easy acronym, very easy. What's it called when you add words to the acronym? I don't know. But the mnemonic, I think it's mnemonic for people to remember.
Yeah.
Arsenal Pass usually delivers. That's how you can remember it. APUD.
There you go.
And if you hate us, you can say Arsenal Pass under delivers. Up to you. We had 3 Battle Hardens this past weekend. Battle Harden Milan was won by Lorenzo Pisoni. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it was won on new. And then Battle Harden Tokyo was won by Ryosuke Urase on Florian. And Battle Harden Hartford was won by Jared Contaldi on Florian. So 1 new and 2 Florian wins. Battle Harden wins this past weekend. Again, new being up there, something that's continuously surprises me.
I mean, it's kind of to be expected, with the if you remove Aurora from the equation, right? New and Florian are the top 2 most winning decks for the PQ season. So it does pretty much align with what's happening. But it's very interesting though, because right around the corner we have the new set, and a lot of stuff's going to change. Or, I mean, we assume it will change. It doesn't always, depending on what happens. Maybe Florian still got it, whatever the case may be. But I'm interested to find out.
Yeah, especially with a whole new class coming out as well. It seems to be the sort of class that might have polarized matchups, sort of like typical of like an illusionist or a wizard. So definitely have to see how Gravy Bones does it. All right, moving on to the command and cookout. Nathan, we picked one question specifically for you. We think you're going to really enjoy this. This one comes from XXMew2096 on YouTube, which is, how would Vincent change if LSS printed a card that made Soul Shackle tokens? Maybe a non-attack action that did something relevant and also made a Soul Shackle token. It could even be a piece of equipment. I like the idea of being able to hit the Soul Shackle token with Deadwood Dirge. What do you think, Nathan?
I think it's a very interesting concept. The way that I approach kind of Vincent deck building is it's kind of like a thermodynamic problem where you have like something coming in and then something coming out, right? Your rune chant generation is coming in and your rune gate is using that as a resource, and that's what's leaving. So if you have a shackle mechanic built into the deck, then you're obviously increasing what is leaving or having cards that demand that resource. So therefore, from a design perspective, you would have to increase your rune chant generation, or in a very dangerous avenue, you would have to create non-attacks with Go Again that could just be played from Banish, but then we approach very quickly a Seeds of Agony kind of situation, and it gets very dangerous very quickly.
That's a very interesting take. I've never heard of the thermodynamic analogy for Vincent, but I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it comes to ratios of the deck, right? I haven't heard too many people talk about balancing Runechant generators towards Rune Gate, which are your Runechant payoffs.
Mhm.
For my take on this question was, I imagine we'd see more Blood Debt extender cards like Putrid Stirrings, which I know a while back, like pre-Cull, some Vincent lists really like Putrid Stirrings. And I imagine if we had Soul Shackles, maybe that comes into it, which moves it slightly towards the chain-esque type play pattern of the spectrum that you were talking about, like almost like the Seas of Agony stuff, but more expensive and not as wide. But at the same time, I will also say if they made a Soul Shackle token, I'm not even sure if Vincent would play it because it'll make her fatigue faster, which is something she's already vulnerable to, right? Like just there's so many decks that can just be like, I'm just gonna block out everything you do, and you're gonna deck
Right.
out. And if she's making tokens that decks herself out faster, maybe it's not something she wants to do.
It would be very high risk, high reward, but that's when you might experiment with like what is it? The one that recurs the non-attack action that has blood debt, and you could do the whole Howl from Beyond and the attack action one that recycles as well, and get a little engine going or something like that. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, Unhallowed Rites or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, because it's Bounding Demigod and Unhallowed Rites. Yeah, you got it. The 1 for 4, and it says if you've played a non-attack, put a non-attack in your discard to the bottom of your deck, and you can get Howl from Beyond, and you can kind of like get this recursion situation going on. And then of course you just have the pure thickness of Putrid Stirrings and stuff like that. Getting a beefy 5 pump off of a red is pretty decent.
Yeah. And if you can even run the blues, like Chain ran the blue Seeping
Mhm.
Shadows, I think, something like that. There was the blue that Giz gave Go again. And it
Yep,
cost
seeping. Yep.
3. But as Vincent might just go the tall route and then go play blue Putrid Stirrings. And it's a blue base and you can banish off the top. So yeah, interesting
Mhm.
thought experiment there. All right. Yes. So thank you for the command and cookout question. And if you want to give us a question, you can go ahead and leave us a comment on YouTube or email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You could also just message one of us on Discord or even come up to us at an event. I'm going to be in Vegas for US Nationals, and Hayden is going to be at Taipei this weekend. So if you see any one of us, feel free to give us a question. With that, Nathan, we're going to move on to the main topic. Lots to cover over here, which is kind of why we breeze through the starting part of the pod. But now we get into the actual meat and potatoes. So let's start with the bans. So for those of you who don't know, Classic Constructed saw quite a few changes in the ban restricted announcement. I'm going to list out the bans first, and then we'll talk about them one by one. Count Your Blessings is gone. Red and yellow both gone now. Last time they just banned the blues. Now it's all gone. Germinate is gone because Florian is doing really, really well. Alongside Germinate, Scepter of Pain also gone to know Florian a little bit. And then Katsu fans are loving this one. Bonds of Ancestry Red is back in Classic Constructed. So let's start with Count Your Blessings. A couple of weeks ago, Hayden and I were doing some predictions for the ban restricted announcement, and I called the Count Your Blessings ban. When I say called it, I mean I was really hoping and coping that they'll ban it, and I'm super glad that they did. Nathan, what are your thoughts on the Count Your Blessings ban?
I've always had the opinion of this card being a pretty balanced, especially after the blue left the format. I thought that like it didn't really do anything particularly oppressive. It did create this pre-game guessing game where like if you're playing against a more non-meta hero, you kind of like have to ask yourself, is this Olympia trying to fatigue me, or does this Reinhardt doing something a little sneaky or something like that? Because I mean, we've seen it all. We've basically seen every single hero run CYB in some version, at least try it. And so that guessing game is gone, which I think is a good thing. But more importantly, just the armory scene. I think that's a card that really just kind of did a lot of damage at that level. And just it's not something a newer player has the toolkit to answer, no matter what they're playing. And it kind of just presents a situation where you can't you don't have any chance to come out on top.
You talking about we've seen all sorts of heroes play CYB just reminded me of Pro Tour London, the first round where we saw Gregor, our
Oh,
world tier
literally.
champion, play CYB Fang. I was like, what is
Yeah.
happening? Yeah. For me, the issue was it just felt like it took away too much from hero identity. Like I just
Mhm.
hated that it was generic, and that meant usually anything else your hero is doing takes the sidelines and CYB becomes a spotlight, right? We talk about like it's CYB Fang or CYB Enigma, and whatever else
Mhm.
the hero is doing is just an afterthought, or like it fits well around CYB, but CYB is the main strategy, and that was just something that I didn't really like about the card. And I just didn't see why it needed to exist. But I'm definitely with you on it wasn't egregious power level wise. For me, it was honestly mostly a flavor and just on the coverage side as well. Just didn't really make for good coverage either.
Yeah.
It was kind of boring, which
Mhm.
I think there could be interesting like blocky, fatiguey type decks, but CYB wasn't it. I think.
Mhm.
All right, the next
Yeah,
big one. Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say it did really like just invalidate a lot of like the whole way you can bat fatigue, just setting up big turns and if they heal a bunch of life in between those big turns, you're not really doing anything, you're not progressing the game, and it's not exciting. You don't leak damage or you leak damage, but it doesn't matter because it just gets made up later and it's not ideal.
Yeah, it basically let them block on turns when they weren't being attacked. If you think about it,
Hmm.
which is,
Yep.
I mean, again, like I don't think like it wasn't egregious power level wise, but it was just yeah, it could be a little bit frustrating to play against. I'm happy to see it gone. The next one, Nathan, this is in your wheelhouse. Runeblade, Runeblade aficionado, Germinate is gone. Actually, let's discuss Germinate and Sefta Pain together. I think because it's both targeted towards Florian. What are your thoughts on these?
I think that this is the combination of these two cards is probably one of the most impressive bans I've ever seen LSS do. The combination of these two cards, because if you look at it kind of holistically from what it's going to do to Florian, right? You take Scepter of Pain out of his toolkit. Okay, now what? How does Florian adapt to that? Well, he has to basically he's forced into the mid-range strategy at this point. Okay, because you no longer have enough rune chance to really stack and kind of lean. Um, with that being said, okay, if that strategy is gone and they're going mid range, I would really encourage people to ask yourself how much threat density is actually in a Florian deck. Um, and the answer is it's not that much. It's a couple failings, a couple plows, some blue fruits of the forest, and a weapon. And you can actually fatigue them. And the removal of Germinate opens up that weakness in Florian's gameplay and allows players to exploit it.
Yeah, I found that as new actually. Even when Germinate was around, there were many games against Florian where I either fatigued them or came very, very close to fatiguing them before dying. And
Hmm.
typically, it wasn't really Germinate that got them out of it. At least against new, oftentimes you can't really resolve a massive Germinate anyway. It was
Right.
actually channel the Millennium Tree that would kill
Hmm.
me because if I only present AB1, then they'll leak 3 every single time from each tree. Each tree will leak 6 because the turn it comes down, they send Arcane, and the turn afterwards, they send at least Arcane as well. So minimum 6, and
Right.
sometimes some trees stays like 2 counters, and it becomes like even more. So I was leaking like 18 to 21 damage, just unpreventable. So I started bringing AB2, and yeah, with Germany gone, I'm kind of just like, yeah, maybe the fatigue strat is completely viable for other decks as well because
Mhm.
Florian often struggles to send more than 12 in a turn, actually.
Right.
So, my question for you, Nathan, is do you think Florians adapt in a way to increase their threat density? Could we perhaps see what they tried to do against Enigma with like Channel Mount Heroic and like Rune Rager Swarm? Just more go again and more just increase the threat density in that form rather than in the form of Rune Chance with like Read the Runes or whatever that we see the Scepter Florians have been doing.
I think that two ways that the Florian players have an opportunity to adapt with would be one, like you mentioned, CMH, threat density, and take that angle to reduce the idea of being fatigued. But also you could kind of, if the image is that Florian can't stack, what happens if they add a couple remembrances and they get in those key tools like, Rune Blood Incantation that makes 6 rune chance off of one card? Um, can they stay alive long enough to actually execute that is a good question. But if they can, if the meta gives them the runway to do that, then they can kind of counter the idea of being fatigued and just lean back onto a less reliable, slower version of what they were previously doing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think some of them were already on Runeblood Incantation, but I could see them leading more into that, as you're saying. And I think one impact of Germinate that is sort of in the back of people's mind, but I think actually should be at the front of people's mind, is because I think the text on Germinate was actually the least used part of it. Like the number of times I saw Germinate being resolved was actually very, very few. The strength of Germinate was Earth, Blue, non-attack, block 3, which is
Yep.
super, super premium. And I think
Mhm.
that's an impact that'll be felt even more. And I wonder if I think that by itself is actually enough to just knock Florian down a notch, regardless of the text that was on the card.
100% agree. I mean, you look at the replacements for a card like that. You have like Blue So Tomorrow and stuff like it. Just not very exciting cards. They serve a purpose. They'll do something. But and another thing you kind of mentioned like hidden aspects of the ban. Um, just Florian not having access to that card, right? You have certain heroes like maybe Guardian that would never even attempt to fatigue a Florian because they know Germinate exists. But if that's not in the card pool, the initial reaction of what should happen in the meta is they should start to experiment with that idea because there's no immediate thing that's just saying, look, you're not going to do that because I have this card that just makes a bajillion rune chance.
True, I have heard some rumblings of Jarl. Like some people want to experiment with Jarl again because
Mhm.
now the game plan of you blow up the grasp and then you have a better weapon than them and you just outvalue them
Yep.
is potentially completely viable. Is that something you think that it could happen? Is that something you think is viable, or do you think Florian has some play around the grasp being blown up? There.
I think that in the first 2 weeks of nationals, I think that the Jarl plan is very viable. Um, I would caution against that being a long-term solution. I think that the Runeblade card pool is large enough and diverse enough. I mean, Pankaj, you've seen me play cards like Rites of Replenishment and Fatigue, Giga Fatigue Oldham with Briar. I mean, right, we have the cards to solve those problems. So if you give the Runeblade players the space and the time, they'll come up with a solution.
Agreed. They might take a while to get there because, yep, I've seen you play
Right.
that, and that is successful. But I've also seen you play Rusted Relic into Iceland as Briar, thinking that
That's
would
fair.
work.
Hey, that was also successful. I was at table 2 next to Hamilton right
Oh,
before we won the whole thing. So
wow. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
Rusted Relic, I got 13th at that Nats. It worked.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Right. I take that back then. That was awesome because I feel like I know when we played it in testing, I was like, bro, I don't think this card is it. But anyway.
Oh, it worked.
Yeah, so coming back to replacements about Germinate, yeah, every Earth 3 block is already in the Florian list. So this really just takes away 3 Earth 3 blocks. And so for now, they're going to have to make do with probably an Earth 2 block, which when combined with embodiments of Earth is actually, you're going to feel that most likely. But speaking of replacements, they did hint that there is a new card coming in High Seas, the expansion slot, which they said works very well with Germinate and is potentially a replacement for it too. So like before he can get to the point where he has both of them, they're just banning this one. And it's okay, obviously we can't discuss too much without knowing what the card is. But something that it did strike me as similar, it's like it reminded me a little bit of the High Octane ban, where there was a new card that came out, which was Cerebellum Processor. And instead of banning the new card, they banned the old card, which is High Octane, in a sense. And this reminded me a little bit of that, where I'm like, oh, okay, where the older card is sort of paying the sins of the new card, in a sense. We can't go too much into it because we don't know what the new card is. And maybe the new card is like less egregious in Germinate or something. But it was just something I wanted to bring up, where I was like, if both these cards can't live together, how was the decision being made on which one is the one that's going?
Right. The one place where my mind went in regards to them saying that the card was coming, it was actually I thought it was more of kind of a PR move because the community is kind of very sensitive about the Aurora situation, right? And then you hit Florian, right? So my logical thought process is just okay, those players are not going to like that Florian got hit. So how do we kind of ease that situation down a little bit? Oh, we tell them, hey, right around the corner, there's this card, and that kind of like if you're a Florian player, you have to feel a lot better. And so that's kind of where my mind went.
And it's also perfect timing, right? Because it's right after PQ season, and High Seas is dropping the day. Like anyone who's playing internationals will have access to his expansion
Mhm.
slot card. So they're not missing any, any high level event. Um, like post the ban. They're not like, oh, I can't play in this one because I don't have my expansion slot card yet, and my Germinate's banned. There's like the next event they want to be at, they'll have access to it. The Scepter of Pain ban, something I did. If you want to dive a little bit deeper on this one, the justification they gave was that similar to Kraken's Aether Vein, this card came out like before AMP, and so it wasn't balanced for it, which I think makes a lot of sense. Although I did think it was curious because the wording on both these cards, Kraken's Aether Vein and Scepter of Pain, definitely read like one day they were gonna print a buff effect for it. So that was just something that was interesting to me as well. I was like, when we first saw those cards, like when they came out, I think both came out in Everfest. Um,
Mhm.
Everyone read the cards being like, okay, we don't have a way to buff this yet, but it's going to come one day. And then it came, and then they're like, oh,
Yep.
we got to ban these now,
And they're gone.
which is interesting. Where it was like clearly worded to have support for buffs later, and then when the buffs came, they're like, oh, we can't have this actually.
I think what happened there was probably they probably did anticipate it, right? Because like you said, it was very deliberate wording. But maybe they didn't anticipate AMP 3, right? Like if you have a card that amps 1 and maybe amps 2, right? It's not as egregious, but maybe they had to push the millennial tree in a certain direction to make it fill a certain spot for the set, and that kind of drove what ultimately happened. Because I could see a world where amp one on Scepter of Pain, that's no issue, right? Like that seems perfectly fine.
Yeah. Oh, in Verdance's case, where the amp is potentially even way higher than 3, right? It's like, yeah, you can't have
Right.
Kraken's Aether Vein with that. I'm curious how much the Scepter specifically is going to change the Florian decks, because what I was hearing was that a lot of them were moving towards mostly being on Reaping anyway. I don't know if that aligns with your
Hmm.
experience as well, but that was something Hayden's been talking about on the pod for like weeks. He's saying like, oh, he has Scepter in the list, but a lot of times he's just defaulting to Reaping into most opponents. So I'm curious how much that's going to change. I think one thing it is going to change is that at least opponents don't need AB3 into Florian anymore. So AB3 is something I would bring into Florian if I know they were on Scepter. Or if I didn't know what they were on, I'd bring it to Hedge. But at least now, the most I'm probably going to bring in is AB2. So I think that helps a lot on the opponent side. But on the Florian side itself, it's interesting that a lot of them were moving towards Reaping anyway. So I wonder how much this will be felt.
Yeah, I don't think this ban is actually impacting the Florian deck at all. It's impacting the opponent gaining 2 equipment slots. I think that's the effective, result of the ban. So I think that a lot of us just started on that full Scepter package and then kind of migrated into a, Scepter, Reaping Blade, and the sideboard kind of situation. And I think ultimately what's going to happen is, well, like you mentioned, 80% of us already have is just running Reaping Blade by itself with no Scepter package. And obviously now we have to because the card's banned. And I think that that's what it's going to end up with, and for justifiably so.
All right, and the last ban, or rather unban, in the announcement. I don't know if I feel like you were also a Katsu enjoyer at some point. I don't fully remember. Maybe I'm making that up. But
I'll
Bonds of
play a little bit.
Yeah, you did, right? Yeah. So Bonds of Ancestry Red is back. So Katsu fans, we heard them rejoice all over the world. Do you think this makes Katsu real?
It's funny because a month ago I did a stream and somebody mentioned in chat, hey, they should emergency unban bonds, and I was like, that. I mean, I literally right then said that, yeah, I think they'll do it. but I don't think it'll make a difference with Katsu. But then I thought about it for another 20 seconds, and I think he might can do it. Like there's enough there. The blue card, I forget the name of the new
Retrace the
one.
past.
Retrace the past. That card is in Ninja when you're running Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. Anytime you have a card in your deck that you would tutor over Tenacity or Salt the Wound, the card's busted. That's all you need to know. If you could choose any card in your deck at 2 or less power and you grab that, it's a good card.
You know, I never thought about links in conjunction with that card because I always just assumed Katsu would be a Mask of Momentum. But that is a very interesting point. And I did also want to talk about Retrace the Past because the way I've been viewing this unbanning is sort of like Katsu's getting 2 cards because when Retrace came out, he was just completely unplayable. I don't think many people even explored him much. I don't think, like, I've never
Right.
played against a Retrace the Past. I've never seen it being resolved because no one plays Katsu because he had no reason to play him. But now there's reason to play him again. So now, in my mind, he's got Bonds back and he's got to Retrace the Past. So he's sort of got a bump of like 2 really, really strong cards. And I just don't think he's been explored enough for me to say for sure that he's not coming back. And I'm with you. Where I was like, you know what? I think he's definitely worth exploring, and he might have a splash.
Mhm.
Yeah. We'll leave that to the Katsu and Jazz. But you think Lynx over Mask of Momentum?
I think both have their place. It really just depends on where the meta is going to force you into. Can you play that longer game and get more on hit value? You know, are people more inclined to blocking, less inclined? Because one of the best things you can do is tutor Tenacity on a deck that wants to block you. It's huge.
Yeah. Okay, so those were the bans. We're going to move on and talk about the Living Legend system update. So I know you had quite a bit of a discussion on this on your stream yesterday evening. Like I said, I didn't manage to catch it, but I'm going to be able to react to your takes live. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the relevant part in the announcement. Basically, in the first year of a hero's legality, so when it comes out, for a year after that, any Living Legend points they earn will be halved. So suppose there's a ProQuest and 3 points from that, they're going to get 1.5 points. And in the second year of a hero's legality, they'll get LL points at the normal rate, so at 1 times. And then after 2 years, they get 1.5 times the number of LL points every time they win something. Also, the fractional Living Legend points are now going to be tracked in the back end. So we don't have the rounding stuff that was happening this past PQ season, which means that when they say, oh, across this season, 1,500 points are up for grabs, it'll actually be 1,500 points instead of what happened this past season, where it was supposed to be 2.51 points per ProQuest and was rounded up to 3. So it ended up being like 1,700 points or something were given out across the season. I don't remember exactly, but it was more than 1,500. So all these changes mean that generally heroes are going to be LLing slower, particularly the first year of a hero's legality, they're going to be LLing much slower. So I believe, I haven't fully done the calculations, but I think I saw someone else do it. If this had been in place, Aurora would still be legal right now. She wouldn't have gotten enough. So, yeah, Nathan, I'm gonna hand it off to you. Give me your breakdown on this announcement. What are your thoughts?
One thing that's definitely going to solve is LL leaving, or one thing it's going to solve is Aurora leaving very, very early, especially with the kind of tensions arising around the Armory deck being only viable product for approximately, 2 months. So the change does prevent that from happening, and also it just provides the consumer the confidence of buying into a hero, and actually having access to that hero for the foreseeable future, and getting at least. I mean, you would really have to break the game for somebody to LL in less than a year under the current system. So they're basically guaranteeing that a hero will last a year and a half is kind of how I'm interpreting the top half of it, or the reduction in points for the first year.
Right. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. Like, that part makes sense where we won't get the Aurora level situation. Like, she's the fastest LL since Starvo. One other thing I will point out is that it's important to note that, as always, as with pretty much everything in the game, they are constantly monitoring this. They're constantly monitoring all these sort of systems and changes that they put into place, and they're generally quite quick to change something if it isn't working. I mean, I feel like every 6 months we talk about a new change to the LL system, right? This isn't new. They're constantly updating the LL system, so they're generally pretty agile when it comes to this. There's something that sticks out to me, something that bothers me a little bit, where I'm like, on the one hand, is this, in a sense, systematically supporting power creep, where new heroes are basically allowed to be stronger for longer because they're only getting half the living legend points that they should be. And the reason why I bring that up as a potential sticking point is because they did also announce that they're going to increase the ban and restricted frequency, right? This is going to happen, like this LL system change is happening alongside their commitment to increasing the number of times they do bans and restrictions. So my question is this LL point reduction necessary? Because in my mind, if the BNRs are doing what they're supposed to do, wouldn't that automatically prevent outcomes like Aurora LLing within a year? Like, if they had a BNR earlier and then they hit, say, the Flicker Wisp, which they said they might have wanted to do anyway, if that came earlier, does she need to also have 0.5 times living legend points? Like, shouldn't the BNR sort of be the one that solves that, rather than having this, in a sense, artificial deflation of LL points?
It's actually very interesting that you made that point, because it does create this incentive structure on their end to where they can. So the biggest risk for them power creeping, right, is them losing the brand new hero, right? Basically, what happened with Aurora. That's their biggest risk. And like you mentioned, it kind of just removes that. So now they just are incentivized to really experiment with pushing that envelope and really kind of testing those boundaries, because there's nothing there to really bite them. And it really depends on how they do it. But you're right. If they were going to act quick on bans, then do they even need that change? So maybe the change is to just buy them some buffer space, maybe like just kind of give them some breathing room in the event that a mistake does happen. But you're 100% right. Like, if they did it how they're planning on doing it, they shouldn't need it.
Yeah, you have to wonder, if the 0.5 LL points thing was in place, would they have hit Flicker Wisp if Aurora was showing everything else the same, but this
100% not.
Yeah, and I mean,
There's no
actually,
way.
we don't even need to sort of theorize what would they have done if Aurora was around. Let's talk about Florian. Would they have hit,
Right.
like, he's at 700 something points right now. If instead he was at 350 because he was getting 0.5 LL points, actually probably even less because the fractional change as well, right? So he would have gotten 2.5 instead of 3 per ProQuest win, so he'd be maybe like 300. Would we expect a Germinate and Scepter of Pain ban if he was only at 300 points at this point, despite him having as strong of a performance so far? Like, maybe. I mean, I do want to trust that they will hit sort of outliers and balance. I do trust them on that front, but and so maybe it's just a buffer space thing that you were talking about. But you also have to wonder if this LL thing wasn't sort of putting a pressure on them to act quickly. Like, would we see these bans come into place? That's just one of those things that did stick out to me, where it felt like they were attacking the problem of Aurora's ascension too quick, from two angles at the same time. And I'm not sure whether both were necessary and whether just the increased BNR would have been enough.
I mean, it was a really rough situation. So maybe it was a tad of an overreaction, in a way. So, like, because it was not a good look, right? Like, a lot of players got burned. There's stores that are getting burned, right? If it's still sitting on their shelf, they're not going to be able to sell it, or it's going to be a lot harder to anyway. So maybe it was a slight overreaction. Entirely possible.
Could be. And I mean, again, they are constantly monitoring this, and if anything, we can definitely trust them to make a change on this system after they feel like, if it doesn't work out, I think we can definitely trust them to make a change on it also relatively quickly. So we'll have to see how this works out. Maybe it just works out totally fine, and maybe they also continue to do the BNRs as normal, and then we actually get Aurora around for like 18 to 24 months as is their target at a reasonable power level. Like maybe it all works out. So we'll have to see. The other thing that was interesting about this LL update was the 1.5 times multiplier for heroes that have been around longer than 2 years. And I was very, very interested to ask you this question specifically, particularly because the first thing that came to my mind when I read this was like, that means Viserai, who was sort of in a hole for quite a while until Rosetta came out, would have LL'd that much quickly after Rosetta. Like Rosetta came out and he LL'd within 6 months. I mean, he was already like about halfway through, but that would have been even faster if this change was in place. And I think a different hero with a similar trajectory was Lexi, where she wasn't really played, and then Outsiders came out, and then she suddenly skyrocketed and was super viable. She would have LL'd very quickly. My point being, in a general sense, there are a fair number of heroes that are waiting for the support, and then when they finally get the support, they're finally playable, and people are happy that they can finally play the Lexi, they can finally play the Viserai again. But then now that the time they can actually enjoy that hero again is a lot shorter because they're getting LL points at 1.5 times speed. What are your thoughts on that part of it, especially someone who loves Viserai and kind of went through that, he's unplayable, and then now he's playable again?
So that was exactly where my mind went when I first saw the announcement. I was like, okay, so everybody that's just waiting for their time, all the Riptide fans are finally going to have their day, and then zoop, he's gone, right? It just because of a couple card combination, maybe Codex version 2, whatever the case may be. And just it is an unfortunate aspect, but I guess at the same time there are some benefits, right? There's a very serious problem in Flesh and Blood with hero bloat, right? I think they have said several times that their ideal number is kind of like 30, and we're about to break 40, if I'm not mistaken. Like we're up there, right? And so you would have a situation currently where Kano would be gone, Azalea would be gone, Dash would be gone. There's a lot of those heroes that have kind of just been, even I think Brava would be gone, right? Like he's got like what, 670, something like that. Like he's
Okay.
he's kind of up there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's obviously been here for way longer than whatever the threshold is. And he kind of went on that tear when Hamilton started using the Tunic Bravo kind of strat. And so there are definitely pros and cons for sure. It really just depends on, I guess, what is the higher priority. Do you want to kind of like placate to the specialist and the people that are sticking around, or do you want to kind of like manage how many matchups somebody has to learn for an event?
Yeah, it is super interesting because, yeah, I mean, you brought up a very good point. Generally, the number of heroes that are entering Classic Constructed is outpacing the number of heroes that are leaving it. We're sort of in a space right now where there's a whole bunch of LLs happening, but remember all of last year, it's like one hero LL'd. And once these top few heroes right now LL, it feels like we might be in a similar spot. And we're going to have a whole bunch of new heroes again, right? Like, don't forget Hunted released 3 new heroes, right? And I think we've seen like 3 or 4 LLs since then, but then High Seas is coming another 3 heroes. It's like heroes are coming in faster than they're going out. So maybe those 1.5 times is needed to remedy that. But I will also say it does feel like it might be a little bit painful for, I mean, like your teammate, right? Like Josh Lau sort of always tries to play Dorinthia. Somehow,
Right.
every meta, he's going to try and make it happen, and it's never worked. But one day, maybe she's going to get something, and then she's finally playable, and then he gets to play her for like 1 season, and then she's gone
Right.
because of the 1.5 times thing. So it feels like some of these heroes don't get the same runway where they can actually be played, compared to the heroes where they come out and instantly viable because of the 0.5 times thing. So I think it's important to note, but yeah, to your point, maybe it is just necessary to combat the bloat.
Is there any situation where the average number of heroes in a particular class has drastically increased over the past year, right? Like, for the longest time when I played the game, there was like 2 ninjas, right? And there was like 2 rune blades, and now we have 4 rune blades, and we have, you know, probably 13 ninjas at this point. I mean, there's no telling, and there is a lot of variety, right? And so maybe that is one of their strategies to kind of counteract that specialist losing a hero, right? You have plenty of options that you can kind of bounce to if that does happen. Not saying it's a perfect solution, but just trying to look at all, kind of analyze all the possible benefits that could come from it.
That's a very fair point, because I think something that they always are very aware of, and props them for that, is sort of maintaining players' sort of collection value in a sense, and also for
Mhm.
people who enjoy a certain class. Like when a hero LLs, giving them another spot where they can use the same cards, if not immediately, at least not too long after. Right, like Light Illusionist, for example, Prism LL'd, and like next Prism is like around the corner. You don't have to wait too long. You can play those cards again. And so yeah, so to your point, where it's like, okay, Warrior gets support, probably would have been a different Warrior in that set anyway. Dorinthia maybe Turbo LLs because she's getting points of 1.5 times the speed, but there's that other Warrior you can go ahead and play, and still use your Warrior cards again. So yeah, maybe the 1.5 times thing is just necessary to combat that. We'll have to see how that plays out. Cool. Anything else on the LL system change, or should we go ahead and talk about LL at Worlds this year? Do you have any final thoughts?
I, I mean, the one thing is like 1.5 times 0 is 0. So if you're a Betsy fan, don't worry about your hero running away from you, because it's just not going to happen. But it does bring up, one kind of last point is like, you know, they still have to give these heroes that are behind some type of support, or they will literally sit there. They'll be there 20 years from now, because, you know, Olympia might win one game a year, right? Keyword, I said game, not tournament. And that's just how it is. And um, you know, they're gonna have to support those heroes. Now, I'm interested in, like, because there's a 1.5 multiplier, are you in that situation where you can take a little bit more risk and maybe give them a little bit more pushed cards, because you have that safety valve to cut them off? Like, it does bring up a little bit of some interesting situations where maybe they can kind of like bring some vitality back into a lot of these heroes, and kind of mitigate the risk some.
It's kind of like the mirrored version of the 0.5 times speed, right? We were just talking about how they can potentially release a hero at a stronger state and they won't like turbo out of the format so quick because they're getting
Mhm.
points at 0.5 the speed. And this is all the mirrored version where all the heroes can also get pushed a little bit, because if they're too strong, they just get out of there for
Right.
after like one season. So that's an interesting take as well. I do want to point out just a brief anecdote with this announcement. It does mean that most heroes won't be getting LL points at 1 times the speed, actually, which I think was just a very interesting way to look at it, because most heroes will be outside of the being legal for 1 to 2 years. They're either like past 2 years or they're in the first year. So
Right.
really, most of the time when you win something with a hero, you're not going to be getting 1 times the LL points, which I think was very, very interesting.
Mhm.
All right, moving on. Big announcement in the BNR alongside the LL bans and restrictions and unrestrictions. That one I'm not going to go ahead. Okay, I will point out the bans. Karen Husk was banned. Crown of Seeds was banned. And then restrictions were Cull, Deadwood Dirge, Succumb to Temptation, and then unrestricted was Hypothermia in Living Legend. And alongside these ban restrictions, they announced that at Worlds this year, LL will be one of the formats. Are you planning to play at Worlds, Nathan?
I am. I got a PTI and everything ready to go.
Awesome. So, what are your thoughts on LL being there?
Um, it's interesting. Um, my first reaction right when I got done reading it, I was like, "Oh no, can they balance it?" That was where my mind went. I was like, "Are we in this situation again?" Because we've seen the battle hardened results in San Jose with 8 Starvos. We've seen the Chicago results where it was slightly better but not really, and it. I was worried when I first read it, but I kind of like, I reflected a little bit, got more composed, and kind of got back at it. And I was like, well, I asked myself the honest question: has LSS ever tried to balance Living Legend? Like, ever, like, actually given it some effort? And because we've seen a lot of reasons that would indicate why they haven't, right? Cracking Aether's vein, like, there's no way they tried that. There's no shot. They said that it was on their radar and that They had the card in the sticky note on the drawer that said "Watch out for this." We heard all that, but like, there's no way they played that combination of tree and that weapon and said, "Yeah, let's run a tournament." There's no way.
Okay. The balancing thing, yeah, that's interesting. One thing that, to me, like my first reaction when I read this, and also the bans, and something that I felt about the format before as well, is that it does feel a little bit like they have just decided that Chain and Starvo are always going to be part of the format. And then bans and stuff happened around Chain and Starvo in a way that isn't fully sort of cognizant of collateral damage happening to other heroes. The one that particularly comes to mind was, I think, last year or something, when they banned Channel Lake Frigid, or they restricted it Channel Lake Frigid. And it's like, okay, cool, because you want to hurt Starvo, and then it's like, okay, so that means Iceland is completely unplayable. And it feels like the reasoning was, look, people want to play the Starvo, so we need to try and power him down to make him be playable, and it's fine if Iceland isn't being played because we want Starvo to be playable. That's a bit of a vibe that I get when I read the ban restriction stuff around LL. Like, when I look at Crown of Seeds being banned, I'm like, yeah, you kind of need to ban something like this so that Starvo isn't just 100% the field. But that means if anyone wants to play Oldhim at Living Legend, they just can't. Like, it's just a collateral thing where, oh, okay, yeah, you can't play Oldhim. If you want to play a Guardian in LL, if you want to play Elemental Guardian in LL, it's Starvo. It's not go play your favorite hero in LL. It's play the heroes we have decided are supposed to be played in Living Legend, which is like Chain, Starvo. And then now it's like, okay, we're allowing Iceland to come back because we're unrestricting Hypothermia. It feels, in a sense, a little bit curated in that. It's less of a go play one of the heroes that has LL that you enjoyed, but a little bit more curated on that because, well, you can't touch the hero abilities of Chain and Starvo. So unless they want to ban those heroes completely, it feels like no matter what they hit, they're going to be having some collateral damage, right? Like, even like the Deadwood Dirge and Succumb to Temptation being restricted, now it's like, if you wanted to play Viscerai, say he was your favorite Runeblade when he was around, well, you can't play him because he got affected in collateral damage because they had to hit Chain. So that's a bit of a vibe I get from the LL format in general. Is that something that you relate to, or like what are your thoughts on that?
I think they entirely changed the entire like landscape of what they envision Living Legend to be. When they first announced it seemed like the general idea was they were just building a playground. And they said if you wanted to go do stupid powerful things, here's your avenue to do so, right? And then they were like, "Oh, well, I guess we'll ban one card, right?" And then they'll be, "Oh, I guess we'll ban three more cards," and I think that this announcement specifically kind of indicates that that's no longer the vision. The vision is not a place where people do absurdly stupid things. I think what they're trying to do is just create a higher powered CC. And what you have to do to accomplish that is you don't have to tackle absolute power and balance. You have to achieve relative power and balance. And the easiest way to do that is what they accomplished here, right? You just take the few biggest problems and you just really get them. Like you just go after their throats. And then once that happens, you just kind of like lower the overall average power and you kind of like establish that relativity. And it makes things a lot easier from a balance perspective.
For sure. I have a question for you. Do you think
Mhm.
that for LL specifically would be a format that would be served very well with hero-specific bans? Because when I look at Cull being restricted, or I look at Deadwood Dirge being restricted, I'm like, I don't think Viscerai and Vincent in LL deserved being hit from that, but I definitely think Chain should be hit by that. I look at Crown of Seeds being banned, and I'm like, I don't think Oldhim should not have Crown of Seeds in LL, but Starvo shouldn't. And things like that. Which, obviously, hero-specific bans comes with a whole host of tracking problems. Like if you're gonna start having LL an armory level, and then your new players need to sort of keep track of like, oh wait, Crown Seed's not legal in Starvo but legal in Oldhim, and it's tougher. But if LL's going to be the format where, I mean, in general, LL's a bit more of a you've been playing this game for a while sort of thing. It's sort of already a bit of a enfranchised player sort of format, just sort of by definition and by the nature of it. And if the competitiveness is going to be at like Worlds and stuff. I do wonder whether it is a format that could potentially be improved and actually allow for more hero diversity rather than the only Elemental Guardian you can play is Starvo, the only Runeblade you can play is Chain, by having hero-specific bans.
I do agree with the fact that if they ever do a hero specific ban, it will be an LL first. However, it's interesting that you brought up that it was like a more franchise player kind of format. And I would beg the question of if they push it into the competitive circuit, is it now? And I think the answer to that question is it becomes not, right? Like if you're forcing people to play a calling of that format or part of Worlds is kind of an exception, right? Because it's very difficult to get there and things of that nature. But when you start having more LL callings and battle hardens, you're no longer putting that demand on, oh, this is a franchise player format or anything like that. It's just like this is what we're playing. Deal with it or kind of leave. And so that point of friction that you mentioned, like I don't know what's banned and where, and because a lot of players are going to make that mistakes. It's just going to happen. They're going to read it wrong. Their buddy's going to read it, tell their friend, and they're going to be wrong, and it's going to happen. So it's very interesting. I can't think of like maybe they can come up with a unique way to do it. But it would definitely be a point of friction. It'd be something kind of difficult to overcome.
Yeah, I think Worlds is, if it's just at Worlds, you could be like, yep, it's an enfranchised player sort of thing. They can probably deal with hero specific bans. But I think they also announced that there's going to be some ProQuests that'll be LL.
Right.
And yeah, and once it's like coming to a ProQuest level, it's like, okay, yeah, you
That's out
can't
the
just-
window.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or even like if it gets to Armory window, Armory level, it's like, okay, this is might be too much of an ask for new players. But I just did want to point out that it does feel like, yeah, it's not go play your favorite LL'd hero. It's sort of go play the ones where it didn't get collateral bans from the other one being the strong one, right? Like Starvo and Chain.
Yeah, I mean, to exercise your point, my favorite hero ever that I played for 2 years was Briar, and I went to the Chicago and played the Calling and the Battle Harden, and I played Viscera and Chain.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if it was what I wanted to play, it would have been Briar, hands down. I would have loved the chance to do that, but it just was not the competitive choice. It just wasn't.
Which, to be fair, I'm gonna play devil's advocate on like my own point here. Maybe like when you were talking about its higher level CC. I mean, in CC as well, you're not allowed to play everything. Like you might really like Betsy or really like Olympia, you're not allowed to play it. So maybe the Oldims and the Viscerais and the Briars and LL are just like the Betsies and the Olympias of CC, where it's okay, cool. It's just you can't play this hero if you want to be competitive in this format, and that's fine. Every format's gonna have that. So just playing devil's advocate on my own argument there, but I will sort of devil's advocate that point as well, saying that in CC, at least like the stronger hero in my class is going to leave at some point, whereas in LL that's not going to happen, right? So am I forever going to not be able to play Brian LL because Chain is always going to be there? Whereas in CC, it's like, like Viscerai left, and then Aurora came and took over that spot, and then Aurora left, and Florian took over that spot. Like you know what I'm saying? I could sit and wait for my hero of the class to be the one in the spotlight, whereas that seems like may not happen in LL, right? Because Chain and Starvo are always going to be there, so I can never play Oldhim ever.
I mean that's actually a really good point that never even crossed my mind, because you're just siloing off everybody but the best one, right? From a competitive perspective, right? If you want to take the game more casually, then you can of course play whatever you want. But yeah, I mean that's a great point. Like you never, if I'm gonna play Runeblade, I'm going to play Chain until they print something better, which hopefully never happens. But you never know, and that's really interesting, and that almost begs that the LL format has to have some type of rotation or season. Like I mean, because you can't. The goal is never to like print heroes that are that busted, right? So you can't ever achieve that level of power ever again. So theoretically, the meta would just be resolved the same way every single time, unless you just had a niche way to attack those particular heroes.
Yeah, sort of the point I was trying to make is that you're a Briar fan, and I know some people are like massive Viscerai fans, or some people are like massive like I don't know some I don't know like I don't know how playable Enigma is in LL. I imagine not very, but like Illusionist fans or whatever, and they just can't play their favorite version, the favorite hero in that class in LL ever, because like these other stronger versions are gonna be there and always gonna be there. And rather than actually sort of the opposite, it's not only that they don't get to play them, it's sort of those heroes get hit by bans meant to target the ones at the top, right? It's like the olden players
just
are like,
kick them down
wow.
and stay down. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's like I'm already not playable, and then they ban Crown of Seeds, and wow, it's like my Oldham can't play Crown of Seeds in LL, and it's a bit like So yeah, rotation feels weird because then what you're gonna have in LL. But I think your point about seasons is potentially very, very interesting. Like I was thinking hero-specific bans to combat this thing, but season I think might be a very interesting take as well. It's like, oh, this season you can't play like Chain and Starburst, like sort of a temporary thing. I don't know how that would work, but that's an interesting point to look at.
And I actually like that idea a lot because it allows them for the first time ever to literally handcraft a meta, right? Because they could take like two heroes of a particular class of each class, right? Because you don't want to alienate anybody, right? So you would take at least one, maybe two of a particular class of each one, and kind of say this is your pool, and you know go right, and they can literally hand manipulate the meta and say, okay, we don't want to worry about chain, we can pull this lever and inject this, and it seems like an interesting situation and one that could, because you're right, that's not a long-term solution. You can't have the best decks at the top forever, like that's just not sustainable.
Yeah, and I mean the handcrafting thing that you brought up is sort of my sort of sticking point a little bit with the format already. It's like kind of what I was trying to put into words, but I think you did it much better. Where it already feels like they're sort of handcrafting it. It already feels a little bit like they've decided Star Wars is going to be the guardian that you get to play, the elemental guardian you get to play.
Yeah.
We're going to ban Crown of Seeds, and we don't care that it hurts Oldham because you should be playing Starvo. We're going to restrict Cull, and it doesn't matter that it hurt. Like I guess Vincent's not playable. We're going to restrict Dirge, and it doesn't matter that it hurts Viscerai because you should be playing Chain. Like it's that something feels like it's already happening a little bit. But yeah, but it maybe leaning into it being a little more intentional about it, where like to your concept of seasons, your idea about seasons, it's maybe the solution. We'll see what they do. It'll be interesting to see how the LL meta shakes out. I think something that I'm very looking forward to is that I think LL as a format hasn't gotten the space to really refine itself, because it was always just like a one-off event, right? Like a one-off Battle Hardened or one-off Calling that happened in Chicago last year. I think having like a ProQuest season where LL is involved is going to actually allow it to develop and breathe, and we're actually going to know what the LL meta is, and potentially have like this will be a little more dynamic. Like when we have reactions, so people are actually going to like think about it more seriously. And I think that'll be very, very interesting. And I think at Worlds, it's actually going to be a very, very entertaining format to play and to spectate, I think. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
100% agree.
All right. The final point on the docket with our last few minutes left. It's a bit of an elephant in the room here, Nathan, regarding US Nationals coming out, which you'll be playing at. So I am going to value your input a lot on this. And what we're going to talk about is product availability for US Nats. So I don't know whether many people have heard, but it looks like a lot of allocation for many, many vendors and stores is being cut. And I do want to preface this by saying I think it can be very easy to like just blame LSS for this. But there is a sort of global sort of shipping situation happening right now, which is completely out of their control, which is affecting this. So I do want to temper that. Now, the thing, I think the fair thing to say is that they were the ones who decided on a pretty aggressive schedule to begin with, which opened them up to this risk factor, which is that, the product is being released the day of US Nationals. But at the same time, I think it needs to be pointed out that this global thing that's happening right now is something that is a bit unforeseen and not in their hand at all when they decided the schedule. So all that being said, going to ask you, Nathan, as someone who is competing in US Nationals, how are you feeling about this?
If I'm being 100% honest, not good. It's I can tell the sentiment of the community for the most part is everybody just seems kind of not kind of startled a little bit would be a good way to say it, where like there's a lot of worry in the air that they're not going to know if they're able to acquire their cards, how much of a premium are they going to have to pay to acquire the cards if they can. um I'm the type of person who typically acquires singles, and even for somebody like myself that is very networked into the community, it's difficult to find cards because you have a lot of people that who normally do that have obligated so many, not knowing their allocation, that you just it's not there. They can't guarantee it. They're probably going to have to even cancel some people that have already paid. I mean, it's looking like that type of situation. So it's very interesting. But like you mentioned, it's a bad situation that LSS got caught up in that was no fault of their own. They did take a little bit of risk by making a very aggressive schedule by having it on release day, but you know, there there could have been a huge upside to that. It could have been very hype or whatever the reasoning was, right? Where um maybe the marketing team got together and said this is like the ideal situation. And maybe it was, right? And just you take that gamble, that chance, and it just didn't pay out. And that happens, right? It sucks that us the players are going to have to pay that bill, because some people will say, well, LSS is going to pay it. Well, they're going to pay it through our aggression because we're mad, but we're ultimately the ones that have to kind of pay the bill on that.
Yeah, it's like like it feels like I don't want to blame them for taking risks, right? I mean, they've taken risks so
No.
far, and like when a risk pays off, like when well, when it goes well and you get the good side of you taking the risk, like we've seen the fruits of that happen. Honestly, the game's existence is basically exactly that, right? So you can't just be like, oh man, you took a risk and then you blame them for that. That doesn't seem correct. It's just as you're saying, it's like one of those situations where they took the risk and this time they landed on the bad side of the risk because yeah, this allocation thing, a big chunk of it is just something that they couldn't foresee, and yeah, it's sort of hurting them and hurting the players, as you said. So how is this sort of affecting, in a sense, I don't like as a competitor, like you are the one competing in this event. How do you feel about like the competition side of things as you enter U.S. Nationals?
There's kind of two sides of the argument, right? Where you have one type of competitive player that wants, the time and the resources to acquire an advantage, right? And kind of achieve that through normal methods. And then you have other people that are in the camp of, well, everybody's on the same situation, the same playing field, right? Which is true, right? But there is, because the timeline is so condensed, right? There are people that will naturally just be at a huge disadvantage just because, like, let's say you have a wedding that you wanted to go to the weekend before, right? Like that would put you so far behind because of one plan that you had, right? Whereas, if I was an absolute grinder, just like really going at the game, I could make that. If I went to that wedding and it was 2 weeks after, I would have the distance to make up that difference and prove that I'm the better player. I have the resources or whatever the case may be. But the more you restrict it, you really just I mean, Matt W said on Twitter, he said that it's like going to the hyperbolic time chamber is the equivalent of like just quitting your job. Like whoever has the PTO at that time, just like is at a huge, huge advantage.
Hmm. And I think it might also sort of um, provide a little bit of a bigger advantage again to players who are part of established teams, right? Or like a bigger team where you get to sort of share those resources, which is already an advantage. But to your
Mm.
point, it sort of magnifies that because now you
Right.
got a short span of time, and then some people can sort of help the others who don't have the time, as you're saying. But also, just like the value of like shared knowledge becomes stronger. because of how short the time frame is. But I do want to come back to something that you brought up earlier, which is the potential upside of this sort of shortened time frame where between sort of knowing all the cards and that's happening. And that's on the coverage side. I think like you brought like we don't know who was responsible for this decision, maybe his marketing or what. But on the coverage side, I think seeing new cards being played in a competitive environment like so quickly, where a lot of interactions are being discovered and sort of almost even being invented like on the fly, is I think that's the upside that they were going for, and that's probably something that they are going to get. So I don't want to just be like, oh man, it's like it's only advantages for like certain types of players. I think there is still there's excitement that will be gained from this as well.
For sure.
Cool. Any final thoughts on anything that we discussed today, Nathan, before we wrap up regarding LL bans, US Nats? Yep.
I got one thing. You just got done saying that it's important for LSS to take risk, and you kind of hinted at the existence of Flesh and Blood is a very risk that they took. And I just want to kind of reiterate the point there that James White launched a trading card game during COVID that focused on in-person play. Clip that, rewatch it, sound it back to yourself again. That is way past any risk meter you could ever even fathom. I mean, it's just beyond the bounds of anything that anybody could ever do. And it gave us the opportunity to play the game that we're playing today. Does that mean that you should be risky all the time? Probably not. But there are definitely times and situations where it is acceptable to take those risks because you just don't want to be stagnant. That's the main thing, and sometimes you just have to.
Yep, that's an absolutely great shout. I think a lot of the progress that we've seen in the game, a lot of the good things we've seen in the game, started off as risks, and those risks pay off, and sometimes it doesn't. And we're in that timeline right now, but that doesn't mean they should be faulted for taking risks in the first place. So yeah, thanks for the shout, Nathan. That was great. With that, before we end up, before I close it out, actually, I want to give you some space to talk about where people can find you. I'm sure a lot of people loved hearing your insights. And for those who don't know, where can people get more Nathan Crawford?
Sure. So, like you kind of mentioned at the beginning, I do a stream every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, over at the Card Guys YouTube channel. We do everything from the usual tier list to just kind of discussing the game, kind of like we did today. Just kind of give my thoughts, some gameplay stuff like that. But yeah, I just love running into people at events. That's like my favorite thing ever, and just kind of I love spending time with this community. I think Flesh and Blood has one of the best communities that a TCG could offer. And yeah, I would love if people would swing by and kind of check it out, see if it's something you would enjoy. And yeah, thanks.
I absolutely love your streams. I sort of treat it as an additional podcast of the week, because it does feel like that's sort of what your stream
Depending on the
vibe is.
topic, it can be.
Yeah, it's typically you're kind of just there in front of your camera and just like chatting and interacting with chat. I guess it's like a live podcast in a sense. Big fan.
Right.
Also, go ahead and give Nathan a follow at Nathan TCGs, which is on the screen as well for you YouTube viewers. With that was episode 214 of Arsenal Pass. Thank you again, Nathan, for coming on, and thank you, viewers and listeners, for consuming this content. We will see you in the next one.